Good day, everyone. This is Bob Roswick of the Bismarck Air Museum, and with me today is Tom Trousdale, our docent, to talk about DC-4s. How you doing today, Tom?
Doing good, Bob.
In the last episode of The Docent and the Doctor, we were discussing DC-3s. Today, and in front of you, you have a DC-3 Dougie in front of the hangar number 5. Today, we want to talk about the venerable DC-4. Tom, tell us about this airplane.
Well, the DC-4 was flown by Northwest from 1946. I know we just looked it up until probably about late 1961. An interesting story my dad told me. Of course, I can't remember it, but the family was flying back from California, and they had gone up to Oregon and Washington to visit family out there. So we were coming back on a DC-4 on Northwest, and they were getting ready to land at Butte. And what you see here is all the clouds. Well, just fill the picture up with clouds and have no ground underneath it. They were getting ready to land at Butte, and it was choppy and bumpy. And my mother has always been a nervous flyer. My dad wasn't, because he was a pilot and flew an old Navion. So he was just holding me on his lap and watching around. All of a sudden, the door flew open, and one of the pilots headed to the cockpit. The door flew open, and one of the pilots had his feet up on the dashboard and was reading the Sunday paper, and the other one was flying. Well, that unnerved my mother, so he had to calm her down. And then they came time to go into Butte. It was cloudy, and down, down, down they went, and the bumpier it got, and the wind blew, and the clouds flew, and you couldn't see anything. So all of a sudden they poured on the coal and climbed out of there. And Dad says it was an interesting experience. The guys at least knew enough to decide, we're not going to chance it anymore. We're going to be going into mountains, and that's the last thing you want to do, is try and do an approach into mountains when you can't see anything and you reach what's called a MDA, a minimum descent altitude, which it's unsafe to go any lower. So that was my ride on a DC-4, bouncing around on my father's lap in turbulence, and I'm sure I was throwing up, but that's my experience with a DC-4. Other than that, I used to watch him come in, because we'd come up from Mott, my hometown, to pick up my grandmother, and I can watch those DC-4s all day, because they would come in and land, and to me they were a beautiful airplane and exciting, and I was in hog heaven watching them land.
So this is an interesting picture. I picked it because the quality was pretty good, and then later on I realized this is from a flight simulator. This is a computer-generated picture. So let's go ahead and move on to what would be a real picture of the interesting DC-4E. Tom, tell us about this airplane.
Well, Douglas built the DC-4E. They built it initially, and I should have showed you in the book that we were looking at earlier, they built it initially with one tail, a regular aircraft tail. The airlines that were interested, which was Pan Am and United, didn't like it, because they said, we'll never get it into our hangars. So Douglas went back and designed it a three-tail airplane similar to the Lockheed Constellation. But the DC-4E could seat 68 people. It could go about 260 miles an hour, had transcontinental range, it had sleepers, as you can see the little windows there. And the big thing was, and you can see it here, it was pressurized, so it could fly up to 20,000 feet and be above a good portion of the weather.
So interesting airplane. So after the success of the DC-3, they tried to develop an airplane, and they called it the DC-4. But this airplane failed primarily because of it did not run economically.
It didn't run economically, and the airlines weren't willing to spend the money to get the airplane. It was at that time, they didn't believe that they would make money hauling 68 people coast to coast. When the DC-4 came out, the DC-4 at its peak, and I'm talking regular commercial carriers now. When it came out, it had 44 seats compared to this one, which had 68 seats. So the airlines looked at it and said, we will never make money hauling 68 people around. It's tough enough filling a 44-passenger airplane.
So this airplane was not economical, and it was complex. And so basically the DC-4 became the DC-4E, and they designed another plane, and interestingly enough called it the DC-4. And Tom, what does the E stand for?
The DC-4E stands for export, and the Japanese ended up buying it and taking it and copying it, redesigning it, and it became a Nakajima bomber that they used in World War II.
And I'd like to point out, it was unsuccessful for us, and it was unsuccessful for the Japanese, because this bomber didn't work. They made 6 copies of it. They hauled troops around it and never dropped a bomb.
Yeah, it was just a little before its time. It was too far ahead technology-wise to be profitable and to actually work. It was designed probably in the 40s with 50 and 60 technology. The technology had to develop to where it is.
What we have here is just a silhouette.
Again, one of the silhouettes that the fighter pilots used. DC-4 was a late entry into the Faring Command for World War II. It was used basically for the Berlin airlift and moving troops around, but basically the primary customer of this was the Air Force and the Navy.
And here's a copy of the one of the early Northwest Airlines aircraft, and that's followed by one with Pacific Western. So very popular airplane once again.
It was a very popular airplane. It got most people started on 4-engine equipment. Crews liked it. They really did. Unfortunately, the stewardesses called it the vomit comet because it never went above 10,000 feet, and in the summer it was quite an airplane to fly.
Thanks, Tom, for that interesting story. The Bismarck Air Museum Foundation is trying to capture and restore the large round-top hangar at the Bismarck Airport known as Hangar Number 5. Log on to our website at bismarckairmuseum.org. Check us out on Facebook. If you like what we're doing, subscribe to this channel on YouTube. In addition, if you'd like to help support the project, log on to our website and give us a donation. I'd like to credit Bismarck Aero Center and the Bismarck Airport for photos that we looked at today. Once again, I'd like to thank Tom. Thanks, Tom, for helping us understand these iconic photos.